indeed we're waking up, then that's a good thing. So let's start like this. Let's look at what has been our annual budget deficit since 2015 to date. That's what it is. Let's look at it on a closer perspective. I mean, generally you will say that, well, it's not on an upward trend, yes, but then it has been ever a widening gap in terms of the way in which our annual average deficit has been hitting us, that from time to time we do have a deficit that in most cases leads the country to borrow in trying to manage it. Now, we are getting ready for the 2021 and 2022 financial year, and the Budget Committee has advised the Treasury Office. In fact, the best headline around this would be that the Treasury has been put on the spot. Number one, they've been told our deficit has ever been widening, and we do not seem to find ways to actually manage it. So they've been told, number one, is that we have to go back and do this. That we have to only target about 1.6 trillion shillings collection in the next fiscal year. So the committee is saying that they don't believe that KRA can actually collect the 2.1 trillion that the Treasury Office want them to collect. They're also telling them that they have to sort of find a way to get off unproductive and untargeted tax waivers and tax breaks to protect revenue. This also makes another talking point on exactly where we have been really. So if you really want to know how our budget has been growing as well, you have to look at what has been our expenditure. All right, let's look at it as well in terms of the government expenditure all the way from 2015 to 2019, 2020. That is the trend that the committee is talking about. That, well, if you are indeed talking about our budget expenditure increasing all the way up to where we are right now, then we have to justify this expenditure. Now let's talk about how the committee looked at this graph. Now they're telling Treasury, number one, under our expenditure, to restructure state-owned enterprises and move with a view of privatizing them by the end of June 2022. Now wait, this is probably will be the magic bullet in the next bullet. Literally, review all government projects and defer some of them by a year and get funds for stalled projects before finalizing the estimates for 2021-2022. Indeed, the committee is saying, well, if you indeed want to push money into development projects, then you have to get funds for those projects before you finalize your estimates for 2021-2022. Now, when Yatani came into the office, I mean, I'm talking about the first few months when it said, well, it was going to bring our debt levels to manageable points. It said, well, they did not plan to get into new projects. Now the committee is telling him, well, you have to first, without a doubt, make sure that you have the money for all the projects that you want to get into before outlining them and also finalizing your 2021-2022 estimates. Essentially what they're saying is that we don't want to run into other supplementary budgets for things you can foresee. And the fact that they want some of them deferred for 1 year also means that, well, we do not expect to see a lot of development in the last year for Jubilee's government. I'm talking about 2021, 2022. So another data point that we have to look at therefore is what has been our tax to GDP, because indeed when they're telling them that we cannot collect what you are putting in your estimates, then it becomes a talking point. Okay, let's take a look at it as well, because indeed, well, you can say that it has been a bit off from 2014 all the way to 2019. Is that, well, when revenue has been on at the lowest, that's when you have the highest tax in terms of percentages going on in the government. A lot of people have been crying about how indeed our tax regime has been punishable, and in the 2021, 2022 regime, that's when we have some of these new taxes that have now been operationalized. We're talking about minimum tax, digital services tax as well, and a lot of other areas that have been actually adjusted, talking about VAT as well, excise duty as well. Now they're saying, well, you cannot actually rely on taxation in the economy, which has been a bit off, as you can see, in relation to our revenue collections in the country to enable you get the money to carry out those projects. Question is going to be, is Treasury going to enforce what the committee is advised them to do? And if indeed they're going to do that, are we going to see a revision in our budget estimates for 2021-2022 if Kyari has just been given a tax target of 1.6 trillion? Because that means then, well, the close to 3 trillion budget that was tabled just the other day in the statement doesn't really seem to add up if we're going to borrow another 1.6 trillion to fulfill it. Stick around, we'll talk about it. Let's talk about Mitumba into the country. Ask around, the biggest talk was that Mitumba was to blame for the way in which the textile industry in the country has been performing. True? False? Let's look at that data this morning. All right, let's look at the value and quantity of imported Mitumba products into the country. And we're talking about second-hand clothing. Because indeed, well, when you have a high import quantity, then that automatically corresponds to a high value point as well when you're talking about these imports into the country. Now, let me tell you about this new report that says this. It says that you cannot blame the high value and quantity of Mitumba imports into the country for the underperformance of the textile industry into the country. All right, let's look at another data point that we have for you this morning under this area as well. That's the quantity again of import of second-hand clothing into the country, which you can say from 2015 to 2019, I'll be dropping in 2020 because we did have a time when they were barred from importing into the country. And you actually say that, well, it has been on a rising trend. Now listen to this. The report says that most Kenyans actually prefer to use local ready-made clothes as opposed to Mitumba imports into the country. It also says Mitumba imports only make 1% of all the imports that come into the country. So there's no way indeed that Mitumba imports could affect the performance of the textile industry in the country. And they're also saying, when you look at that value chain, they're saying that it employs over 5 million people. Meaning that if you cut the importation of Mitumba into the country, then again, you are disrupting a value chain that is well developed. The report therefore suggests that Mitumba imports into the country could sufficiently coexist with the local textile industry, opening a wider conversation on exactly what has been now viewed as a misconception as to why the textile industry in the country has been not performing. Some of these conversations is exactly what it is that we're going to table this morning here on a Business AM. Thank you very much for making your time to join us this morning and begin your business day with us here at Metropol Television.